Hello and welcome to the Product Opscast with Graham Reed and Antonia Landy. Welcome, Antonia. How are you doing today?
I am fantastic. Thank you for asking, Graham.
Fab. Today we are joined by Neale-May, who is VP of Product Ops at Near-Me. Hello.
Hi, thanks for having me. Delighted to,
It,
to
we,
join you
we've
all.
been we've been this has been about a year in the making. I know we were trying to get you on the podcast about a year ago, I think it was, and then things just never aligned between everybody, and so great to finally have you on the show.
Delighted to be here, and someday we will master calendars. But so
Indeed,
far, they
indeed,
elude us at this point.
indeed, we will. You never think we'd work in product ops, would you? You know, we can't organise calendars very well.
We try, but moving targets.
Tell us a little bit about yourself before we begin.
Fantastic. So I have spent the last 10 years or so trying to make sense of chaos in the tech world. I've been working with teams for about 25 years, but landed in tech about a decade ago. And you know those moments where a company stops and people are looking around the room and they're saying, how do we actually make this work? That's where I tend to show up. That's also where product ops tends to show up in the equation, right? So I'm currently leading and building a product ops function in fintech, but I've been all over the map. I've been from startups to enterprise level companies in SaaS. And what I've basically realized along the way is I'm a bit of a translator. So I help bridge the gap between big picture strategy and the people who are actually building the products on the ground and make sure we are building something that's worthwhile at the end of the day. Making the right bet, knowing that we made the right bet, being able to measure the right bet at the end of the day. So I am not somebody who sits in meetings and does a bunch of PowerPoints. I am 100% somebody who will jump into the weeds, sometimes to my team's dismay, to figure out why something is going sideways or the team can't get aligned on what we're building or what we need to make a decision on at the end of the day. So it is a wonderful place to be. One of the things I've observed over the last decade is that every company thinks their problems are unique, but in reality, most of us are dealing with the same fundamental changes. We just call them different names. And at the end of the day, every company who gets to reach a scaling point has to solve those challenges. So looking forward to chatting with you all today.
Well, there's loads I'd love to dive into there, and we are going to dive into some of that today. I think in particular, and I'm noticing this right now where I am. I'm 9 months into my role at Helios and have spent so long being quite tactical, focusing on so much tactical work. And I'd love to dive into this with you today. But our topic, what we're going to talk about today, is scaling product thinking. This is a super, super interesting topic. And I really want to hand straight over to you, Fo. And, tell us about this topic and why you brought this to the table.
Sure. So I think we are in an interesting economic time globally. Right? Let's just put that on the table. That means every company's facing a ton of challenges where they've got to figure out how to tackle growth. They've got to figure out how to deliver outcomes and be successful, but the resourcing is significantly more constrained than we've seen in a while, right? And so fundamentally in the product seat, that means you've got to figure out how to scale product thinking and make the right bets. And so the way I think about product thinking, it's fundamentally making sure that you solve the right problems for the users in the business at the right time, not just building cool features. I would say it's the difference between asking what should we build versus what problem are we solving? And we tend to start with being problem first, not solution first in product. Ironically, that is a really hard mindset to scale, right? It's one that we tend to look at either our executive teams or we look at our product management teams and we say, what should we do? And we come in with these giant open eyes and we really hope that there's a magical solution. But if you've got a team of 250 people and only 8 of those people are product managers, you tell me how 8 of them are going to cover all of the things a business could potentially do. It's just not necessarily realistic. So I think the big challenge ahead of us at the moment as product ops folks is no longer thinking about how do we get the product launches out on time? How do we make sure that we are actually building in a way that's scalable? Now our challenges become how do we show up as a strategic partner, not a tactical partner? And how do we scale that problem thinking throughout product, throughout engineering, and throughout the company that we serve?
I love that. I think I've had this challenge before and I've actually used this, right? I've used this to scale product ops across the company where we started with formalizing things like problem definition for the product teams. And then we took that and we looked at it and we said, see all of these feature requests we get. Wouldn't it be fantastic if they were worded similarly, right, to what we're already used to? And that was an absolute pipe dream. And that involved so much coaching with other functions in the company. But that led to such a great exchange because we as the product org could go to them and be like, listen, this is how we think about problems and this is why it's useful to us. And they could come to us and say, listen, this is how we think about customers, or this is how we think about finances, right? So let's get the both worlds closer together.
I love that statement. It is about bringing people closer together, right? To understand the same problem.
You mentioned about kind of that, the difficulty in kind of having that, thinking much more about the problem than the solution. It's just super interesting because on the same topic, I wrote an article only a few days ago talking about this and actually how that compares with what AI can now do. But I'd love to dive into that in a little bit because this is, firstly, this is not a new concept. Everybody's been banging on about this for over a decade now. Focus on the problem, not the solution. But why is it still so difficult for product teams to actually to do that well? When we talk a lot about it, but then actually doing it is that much harder.
So I have a hypothesis that it's not actually the product teams anymore. Because my last 4 or 5 companies I've worked with, they're phenomenal on product at getting to the root problem and understanding what it is, where the problem becomes convincing everybody else. Because when we see a pain point in the company, whether it's from a business perspective, a market perspective, a customer perspective, the natural thing to do is to say, let's solve it, right? Mm-hmm. So I think as a company, our inclination is to want to dive in and put a Band-Aid over it, or maybe stitch up the wound. Sorry, lots of hospital metaphors today. We should switch to something better than that. But I think in product, that's something we've actually mastered. So I think what is on us as product ops is not getting product to be able to define problems. It's getting the rest of the organization to meet product in defining problems and understanding which are the right ones to invest in. It's one thing to define a problem. It's another thing to understand the impact that solving that problem would have on the business, on the market, on your users. And I think product is really good at defining the problem from what I've seen. I think we are getting better at making sure we make the right bet and we understand the impact of that bet and that we can measure that bet over time. But it's much more difficult to bring the rest of the company along. So I think there is this motion where product ops is bringing folks together into a common lane of understanding of what that problem is.
Yeah, I love that. I think for me, what I've noticed is that when you teach folks this problem first mindset, it's a mindset shift. And I actually think that as humans, we're wired to look for solutions, right? It's not even a personal or professional failing. Like that is our default as humans, that we see a problem and we're thinking about a way to solve it. So going back and say, okay, does this problem exist? Is it acute enough? Is it acute enough for us to solve right now? Right? And then making those things comparable across the board. I honestly feel like that once you've done that in your company, that's when you can say you're product led. That's when you can say that you are a product organization. And I love that product ops really has been at the forefront of building those bridges, because that's where it shines, right? Like that's how we can have the most impact possible on the bottom line.
100%. I mean, imagine a world where you've got designers who think that way. Designers are easier. They're easier hill to conquer. But you've also then got engineers, because that's been my latest experiences working with engineers of my past 2 companies to make sure that they can think problem first, because they think problem first naturally. But it's from a give me this problem to solve, and I will move these technical pieces around and make these architecture decisions to do this, right? They don't think problem. Right? So getting them to up level and think problem from a product and a business lens fundamentally changes the interactions between product design and engineering in terms of what they choose to build and how they execute that. And then imagine bringing PMM, product marketing, into that. And then they're also thinking, and everybody's talking about the same problem. The force multiplier of being able to do that is just phenomenal. And then you've got finance. Our finance folks really love joining the conversation. We're fintech. It's not surprising. So when they join the conversation, imagine then you're all still talking about the same problem and all the numbers line up. It makes certain that you're making better bets, right? Because you're having the conversations. You're engaging in the debate around, why do we believe this is the right bet right now? Why are we certain this is the right problem? Does the solution actually solve that? How do we know that? Can we pressure test this from all sides, right? And I say that, and then everybody always looks at me. They're like, but that takes so much time. Well, yes. Correct. Because the one thing that we can do is get into better alignment up front. It is worth the cycles, in my belief. And people always tell me that's not agile. It is agile, because you're constantly saying yes or no and recalibrating as you learn. But if you can get into that alignment earlier on, then you know that you're building the right thing and you're not wasting cycles downstream to build something that you then chuck over a wall and never succeeds.
There's two things I want to sort of put to you with this. Is that firstly, kind of what's been your experience, particularly with engineers, on being engaged with the user problems, with the strategy, with what problems we're trying to solve as a business, as opposed to problems from a technical building blocks perspective. And what's been your experience of engineers, not necessarily an individual engineer, but over engineering as a whole, in terms of how engaged they are with?
Sure. So I think it really depends on, I'm going to say, maturity or progression in career when people are ready to tackle that, right? Are folks in engineering that are maybe starting out a little bit early in their career, naturally they're going to be focused on things that are just a bit more technical and execution focused because they're building their toolbox, for lack of a better way of putting it. They're building their own mindsets on how to think about the systems. But you hit a certain point with engineers and with engineering as a whole, where you tend to see more senior folks at the table. So I'm thinking like senior software engineers or higher. And quite frankly, they've been there, done that. They know how to build the software. They know how to deploy it. They know how to put the systems in place. They understand. They've seen this pattern before. They know how to replicate it. And they're actually hungry. And I think we in product ops don't take advantage of that often enough. But engineers have been my biggest advocates in the last 6 years because they are hungry to understand, is what I'm doing having an impact? Does what I'm doing matter? Do I have purpose in this ecosystem? There's a deep hunger in engineering for that. So what I've found is when you can find those people, and you're always looking for your champions in your change process, right? When you can find those champions who innately are a little hungry, maybe a little bit curious, maybe they just don't understand something and so they're digging their heels in. And when you open the door and you say, here's the user problem, here's the market need, it's like light bulbs go off. And so I have found that if you want engineering to make this shift, you've got to start by finding your champions. You've got to build change movements, and you'll know change doesn't start with the first 1 or 2 people. It's the 5, 6, 7-year jump on the bandwagon that get it to roll down the damn hill. You've got to find those people. But when you do have those conversations, and it does take conversations, and it does take relationship building, and it does take exposing them to information, when you can find them and you can have that conversation and you can bring together product and engineering to look at the same thing, you see entire engineering organizations shift, right? They're not just stuck in the build now. They're suddenly looking out and thinking, well, does what we build matter? And it's a mindset change, right? It's yet again, it's a mindset change in what they're doing. What have you all seen?
Antonio, what's been your experience?
Yeah, it's very interesting. So I started in quality assurance. So I was always kind of part of the, Scrum team, the cross-functional team. And then out of that, I moved into product and then product operations. So I feel quite close to engineers in general. And it is very interesting. And I've always felt that the engineers who just want to come in, code some stuff, and then leave again, move some tickets from left to right, and then leave again, they're the ones that actually got burned. It's not that they're disengaged. It's because more often than not, at one point, they really tried, or they really wanted to be there. They really wanted to be engaged, and they received pushback, whether that is from a PM or maybe even the CTO, whatever it is. So I actually really loved, as a PM, making them part of that process to really go out there and say, here's what I'm thinking. Here's, the evidence I have so far, or here are my assumptions. What do you think? Rather than just, here's the predefined solution, here's the design, just go and execute it. But absolutely. And I think this is also always an interesting conversation in product ops as a whole. Who do we serve? Do we serve PMs or do we serve the product organization? And I enjoyed the laser focusing on PMs gave me, but frankly, you need to deliver a product to your users, right? In order to make money and in order to make their life more delightful and solve their problems. And engineering is a critical part of that. So I really believe we cannot keep them out of our conversations and out of our processes and thinking.
I love that.
I completely agree. I mean, I've always, I did product management for 10 years. I always was so grateful to work with engineers that were engaged, that wanted to give their opinions. They understood at least enough of the domain space to be able to have valid opinions, quite often spotting things we would never have thought to spot, approaches to kind of solutions we'd never thought to have gone after, and absolutely value everybody's opinion. It's not just them, it's designers, it's product marketing, it's everybody. It's not the case that product management is there to say, hey, I've got the idea, now go and implement. And I think there is a reason why I've mentioned this quite specifically, is because there was a post just last week, or it would have been this week, on LinkedIn, that was talking about this, that was sort of questioning how much engineers should be involved in kind of all of this. I remember exactly the case. And I was very, very passionate about saying, engineers absolutely are just as big a voice in all of this, because they have a certain perspective that is going to be unknown to product teams, to designers, etc., etc. So, and to pick up on your point, Antonio, as well, we are absolutely there. So you and I have had this conversation so many times about actually the name of product operations is a good name. Right. It's not necessarily the most accurate name anymore, but it's what we've got, because it does serve the whole of the product org. It should do. It should be there looking and taking into account what engineers need and want and could do better with, or could be supported better with. So, and to bring them that collaboration back to the fold, being more engaged in those conversations. And how can we help them do that?
I mean, I would argue that it's not product ops anymore, it's product development operations. Just throwing that out there. I think we've expanded.
Makes the name even longer, but yeah.
I know. It's terrible. It's terrible. And there's no good acronym for that either, by the way.
No. So just moving the conversation on a little bit. What's what we're talking about scaling here. So kind of we've got some engaged teams that are now starting to focus much more on the problem than the solution, as we've kind of discussed already. What comes next? What's your vision of kind of scaling that and the division as a whole?
Sure. So I think there's a challenge here where you become really good at defining problems and solutions, and then you get stuck in build. Right? You get stuck in delivering whatever it is that you want to deliver. And so I think the critical way to scale this isn't adding people, which is our natural inclination, but in an environment where people are hard to get, headcount is difficult to come by at the moment, or slow to be added, we have to start thinking about how do we use our humans and their phenomenal brains differently to scale this. And so I start by looking at systems, right? Any good product ops person is going to start by looking at systems. How do people interact? How do we reduce the need to create templates or ways of working or ways of engaging again? How do we put some lightweight guardrails in that say, we expect you to engage in these ways. We expect you to deliver X, as I'm going to call this a minimum viable process, right? This is the minimum that we expect you to deliver. This is the starting point. If you want to go beyond that, like, power to you, giant thumbs up. But that's where this is the minimum required for the business. And so we put all of those kind of like foundational guardrails in place. But then after that, it becomes like, where can we start doing things like incorporating AI? We're at a point with one of the teams I'm working with right now where they were not using any type of AI at all. And I had a moment where I was like, oh boy, we're a little behind the eight ball here. We should let's jump on the bandwagon. So we made a very, very simple change, which is just starting to use ChatGPT to refine user stories. Generate the first version, take your basic notes from your market research up here to get to a first version, and then refine from there. And we saw a reduction in 2 days to write a set of user stories to 2 hours. That's a massive reduction just in time. And it's not the time saving on writing user stories that's critical here. It's that time was then available to think. Because what teams don't have enough time to do is to think and focus on what are the right bets, how do we understand the problem and the solution, and how do we understand the market space. Without time to think, we cannot scale. And so for me, scaling product thinking, scaling the product development function is looking around at all of the teams and the systems and people and saying, how can I make this easier for you to do your day-to-day work? Does that mean we've got to put Jira automation in so you don't have to think about moving your tickets? Does this mean that we need to teach you to use AI tools? Does this mean we need to run off into the corner and try things like Lovable to do really rapid prototype testing so we can say no to 18 potential solutions and arrive on the one perfect one here? Figuring out where those right tools and those right systems are to then empower people so they can take a step back and then spend time thinking. I know it seems kind of basic, but thinking is fundamentally what gets us to the right bets at the end of the day. So as I think about scaling, it's really about time and focus.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to highlight something you said, because it is about making teams more efficient through AI so that they can spend more time thinking. And I think I love AI for efficiency purposes, but we have to be careful about outsourcing thinking to AI. Right. And I'm incredibly passionate about this simply because I am seeing people who are maybe a little bit earlier on in their career be like, oh, fantastic, this can just do all the work for me. Right. even down to, okay, I have a bunch of user interview notes. I'm just going to feed it. It's going to give me my OKRs, my strategy. It's going to do my user stories. It's going to do my Figma design. And then like, I'll just push it to somebody else. And that gets done. And it's now successful because a machine did it. I'm so concerned that we are not being mindful enough of the things we outsource. And I think it's just such an important reminder that the power in tools like ChatGPT or agentic AI comes from getting time back to think, not from doing our jobs for us.
Couldn't have said that better. So I consult on the side as well because Lord knows one job wasn't enough. So might as well go do some other things in the corner. But in doing that, I had a consulting client that really wanted to start using AI to do everything, automate as much as humanly possible because they didn't want to add headcount. They needed to add headcount was the end of the solution, just to lead with the answer first. But we actually ran a small test on their teams where we had the product trios take a day and say, okay, you're going to take the entire process from problem to solution to actual technical plan for execution, right? And we said we're gonna define what you can use. And so one team, and they were folks that were advocates of quote unquote the old way, they did everything themselves. Bottoms up, analyzed user interviews, figured out what the problem was, did all of their own analysis, achingly waded their way through their tech specs and architectural approach, and they only had a day to do it, so they had to do it quickly. We had a middle group that said, hey, you can use some tools, and we gave them a handful of tools to kind of speed up their process. And then we said the last group was very, very pro. Everything should be done through AI. I shouldn't have to do these things anymore. We said, right, run your whole thing through. And then we compared at the end of it, the outputs. Eye-opening, just eye-opening. The team that ran everything through and didn't put any of their own thinking time in, number one, they were done in 2 hours. Like literally, it was a half of a morning. Might have been like 2.5, but it was a half of a morning and they were done and they went off and they did other things with the rest of the day because we gave them the day. And then the team that was kind of in the middle still took the entire day and the team that did it manually did the entire day as well. But the quality was so distinctly different. So the team that did it the old way and the team that was, I'm going to say, AI enabled, not that different in terms of outputs, but well thought out. You could see learning speed increased in the team that was AI enabled versus the team that was manual and they just slogged through. It was a tough day for them. But the team that did everything through and didn't think at all, the quality of what they put out was far below what the other two teams put out. It really, for this group of folks, came back to you have to think. The human in the equation is still so critical to know that we're making the right business decisions here at the end of the day. And they really did things that they had a winner and the quality was just so significantly lower than the other two teams that it was a little eye-opening for the group. So can't agree more that it absolutely comes down to thinking time and using this to accelerate your ability to think, not replace your ability to think.
I love that you tested this. That is fantastic.
I like to prove a point, if nothing else.
I genuinely think that's incredibly valuable. Something vaguely similar that I ran a couple of weeks ago. So I've been experimenting with different AI tools. Most of the kind of inbuilt AI tools that we've got, in Confluence, Jira, Airtable, all those bits and pieces. And just looking at what's the off the shelf stuff. And so I ran a test with Confluence to kind of say, hey, build our release notes. I actually was mildly impressed with what it did. It went into the Jira sprint that I asked it to do. It collated all of the only completed tickets. It brought back. It actually was fairly good. And I gave it to 3 of the product managers. Say, hey, I've run this for you. Well, do these release notes look vaguely right? And so they came back and they went, more or less, yeah. Some of it's a little bit kind of very thinking, some of the kind of the way that it's put about how we fix this particular bug, make it look like we were streamlining the entirety of the process. And they were like, okay, fair enough. But they said, look, it was damn pretty good. And I looked at this and I said, look, what has this actually achieved here? Our teams still have to go back and look at this. Before we were to put this out to the wider business, they still have to go back and look at this. Of the, I don't know, say 10 tasks, so the 10 sections that it came back with, 2 of them maybe had to go back and be rewritten from scratch, maybe. And I was looking at this for the thinking time that's involved in writing those release notes. So actually, if you need to curate them from scratch, you need to think about, well, hang on a second, what was the task? What was the thing that we were trying to solve here? How do I turn this into a way that is valuable? How do I turn this into a way that, a way of writing that is then appropriate for the wider business, not tech folk? And it's actually not that easy to do on a regular basis. You've got to churn these things out over and over again. Whereas actually what has happened now is it's done the legwork for me. I might need to change the odd word for some of them. And then the ones I have to rewrite, actually, I've had a good steer on what I'm going to do. I'm just going to maybe tone it down a little bit. Or actually, even if it has got it completely wrong and I need to start from scratch, it's now done 80% of the work for me. And I got an incredibly good response from those product managers to say, do you know what, if it's still done 80% of the work for me, and I now need to go back and check that, it's not saved me necessarily massive amounts of time, although still quite a bit, but the thinking effort, the cognitive load that has had to go into writing that, and all of the things I have to think about is now significant. And that is where that was a massive win for us. So we talk about time, Antonio and I talk about the time that product ops and by virtue AI can give back to you. But actually, that cognitive load when you're doing things like this day in and day out is also a significant payback as well.
I like that. And actually, I think it's probably the bigger payback. I think that's a kernel of gold right there, because I think the bigger payback is reduction in cognitive load. When we think about how thin we spread ourselves across product development every day, and the more a product grows, the thinner you spread yourself, the more you think you can know, it's just massive. And so being able to focus and reduce that is actually significantly more valuable than time back, because that's quality time back.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, like my own way of describing product ops has changed so much over the years, and lately what I'm using in like talks and stuff like that. And I really try to think what's the most succinct way in which I can describe product ops. And then for me right now, at least, it's creating repeatable systems for high value work. Like that's it. That's at the core of what I'm trying to do. And it's really that repeatable system so that you are not constantly needing to reinvent the wheel. You know, every time a new cycle starts, you're not thinking about, oh gosh, how do I word this now? Or which questions should I ask myself? Or what do I have to remember now so that I do, you know, this bit of thinking now so that I don't waste resources. I don't waste time. I don't have to do, you know, more work later. And I think it really feeds into that idea of reducing cognitive load, right? So that the brain power you have can be spent on valuable things and not just on, gosh, where is this? Or what am I doing now?
Can I steal that?
If you think about those, you know, if you're going to be really basic, you know, looking at those Jira tasks or something like that, and you've got, at some point along the line, you're putting that cognitive load already to write the user story, to do that research, to bring it back to the fold. And now actually you're saying, well, now I need to rethink this again and turn this into, you know, how the rest of the business or the salespeople are going to understand this or our customers are going to understand this. And actually, yeah, you don't, where you can reduce that down, you reduce it down so that actually you don't need, and you said it, you know, you don't have to do it time and time again in terms of processes. It's just valuable.
I love it. I think we're testing the same agent, by the way, Graham. We also started doing that with release notes in Jira. We've had varying degrees of success, but you are correct. The cognitive load change has been pretty solid for PMs overall. And Tony, I would like to steal your description of product ops.
Please do, absolutely.
That was phenomenal, and I think something I can use elsewhere to help folks understand the purpose.
I think it's great. Similarly, the term that you said earlier, Fo, about minimal viable process, I think is super interesting. There's one comment on that, but then this actually moves into another part of the conversation, which is kind of, if you do produce this minimal viable process, and I love that concept where you're saying to your PMs, for example, you know, look, this is the basics to do. If you want to do more, then great. But, you know, that's what great would look like. But, you know, as long as you do this, this, and this, that just gets the job done and gets you over the hurdle. I like to think that Product Ops has a place in saying, how do we elevate product management? Let's just stick with product management process, product management working, product management thinking. So how do you rationalize that to say, hey, you've got the minimum. Why would people want to kind of then do more on top of that? And how do Product Ops can then kind of say, hey, we're gonna get you to do more through those processes?
So the reason I talk about minimum viable process is because it sets a baseline. Everybody needs a baseline. Everybody knows what the minimum expectations are to work from. I actually don't often have problems with getting product managers to want to go above and beyond. It's the how do I do that? And so I set that kind of set of guardrails so that we can then focus on how do we up-level skill set. On my product teams, we spend a lot of time talking about craft, not just because it's fun and it is fun, but also because as we build those skill sets and we expand their toolboxes to do the product management role, they are able to make better decisions about what tactic, what framework, what way of thinking, what way of testing, what experiment to pull out at what moment in time for the problem that they're staring at. So we spend quite a bit of time. You set the guardrails, you set the baseline, you say this is the minimum thing you have to bring to the table. And then there's always a hunger already within product managers of, hey, how do I do this better? How do I think about this differently? So I actually have always been very, very lucky to have teams that want to engage in those conversations. And so we normally set it up in a couple different ways. I almost always will have a weekly session around product craft, and we bring in almost any topic you could imagine. And the teams will nominate, hey, I want to learn about these things. I want to work on this. And almost always focusing on those craft moments lead to process elevation moments. And so as we do, so for instance, we've been working a lot on discovery with my current team at the moment. How do we think about discovery? How do we think about market research? What role does competitive intelligence play in my research? How many users do I have to talk to? Is it 5? Is it 50? What scenario am I like? There's some nuance here that we're kind of working through with the team at the moment. And as we talk through that, inevitably it's going to lead to changes in, well, guess what? How we do synthesize insights in our voice. Ooh, that's a lovely thumbs up. Synthesize insights in our voice of customer program. It's going to lead us to up-leveling our product review process, right? Because if the teams are going out and they're saying, okay, we understand we need to talk to 15 plus users to truly understand this problem and what their actual needs are. And we need to then be able to go back to them and say, well, we think this is a possible solution. Let's put a prototype in front of you and have you react to it and see what the responses are. If they understand those two things, that means we just shortcut our discovery process, right? That means we can probably pull some of these insights, not just from direct interviews, but possibly from existing conversations happening elsewhere in the business, that we can pull that in up front. We can also then move from moderated to unmoderated prototype testing early in the process because we have relationships with these folks. So they're already bought in. They already care that we're looking at the problem. They're already willing to respond. And so you go from a baseline discovery process of saying, hey, I need to see 5 user interviews and I need to see 1 prototype or a wireframe. And suddenly you're looking at, oh no, we need 15 interviews that are synthesized. And here's the tools to do it. And also we need 5 prototype tests. And here's how you're going to get about it. And we also need X number of customers ready to adopt. And here's how you recruit them. And so you slowly start to up-level those requirements as you go through. But I found it's most helpful to start with figuring out where the team has gaps, where they are hungry to learn, and then leverage their learning and their career growth to put in up-level processes. So you have all these micro moments of up-leveling across product management over time.
Yeah, I think something that I've seen as well, I think I try to think about progression in 2 different ways. So one of them is setting that baseline and then building on it. But the other one is at every stage, you improve quality, right? So you might be setting a baseline and that's the first time you've ever done it or first time this team has ever experienced something like that. And then you work to just get better at the baseline, right? And you do that until it's a habit, right? And I think that's what I tend to strive for is habit formation. And then it's like, okay, we've got this habit down. Fantastic. How can we improve on that habit now? Or what new skill or ceremony can we attach to this already existing habit, right? To get further in this progression path. But yeah, I'd love your insights.
Habit change, habit formation, habit change, and behaviour change is probably the thing that I return to most with product ops. It's not the tagline for product ops, but ultimately it comes down to that in terms of everything that we do. And as we know, when we have a habit, it's so much easier to follow a habit than a prescriptive process. Again, coming back to that cognitive load, if you just know how to do it, how do you learn to drive a car? When you first start to drive a car, actually, it's quite stressful. It's quite taxing. And then actually, when you're a few years in, or in my case, nearly 20 years in, I don't even know how I got from A to B. You don't even think about it. It's so almost dangerous at times, but it's so natural to do. That habit is there on how you change gears, turn left, blah, 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 blah. So that's such an underrated part of the role is to get those habits formed. I think it's a piece that people don't appreciate as well, is that actually once you've got that habit, because people don't know what habits they might want to change, they might want to break, they might need a new habit in a new behavior or a new way of thinking. I think it's so super interesting. Go on, Fine.
Well, so I talk about it as muscle memory. I like the framing of habit, but I explained to the teams as you're building muscle memory, you should not have to think about this. It should be automatic. And so when I describe minimum viable process, you're right, it is building a habit, but there should be no thought associated with it. There should just be, I execute, it's automatic in what I do.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, like brushing your teeth is automatic, right? But going to the gym is a whole other habit to form, and both are good for you. Both are probably the right way to go. But it's like you say, you want to get to that point where you just do it. You're no longer thinking about it. It's part of your day.
Yes.
What about the monitoring, Fo, of your teams in terms of, you're putting these new ways of working in, these new processes in place, how they're working generally, how do you monitor that? How does leadership monitor that? And what's the how do you find the right balance between kind of being quite overbearing, micromanaging, etc., and potentially not monitoring enough of the progress that's then being made?
Sure. So I'll be honest, it's never easy, right? Because every company you're at, a different set of leaders wants different sets of information, and your audience changes, right? So I think when I think about monitoring, I actually start with the PMs. And I start with conversations around, do you know your audiences? Do you know your stakeholders? Do you know who's in your sphere? Because we can monitor process adherence until we're blue in the face. But if they don't know who their stakeholders are, they don't know who they're talking to, and they don't know who has a vested interest in what they're doing and why, monitoring is never going to get us anywhere because you won't get adoption. So I actually start with looking at each PM and saying, tell me your group stakeholders, build a stakeholder map. Tell me who they are. Tell me what they need to know. Tell me what we need to understand as we move forward here. That does a couple things in an organization. If you layer all of those stakeholder maps, there's a lot of overlap, but sometimes you've got some outliers, right? And so the way I start thinking about monitoring and adoption of these new processes or any MVP for process is to figure out who's the recipient of the output. Are we able to see that they received the output? Are we able to automate the visibility into the fact that they received the output? And so some of these process things are really qualitative, right? Yes, you can look at, hey, did time to creation of user stories decrease? You can look at that. But is that necessarily valuable? Is that a metric that actually helps you understand how the process improved? Probably not. But what tends to be helpful is, did the decision you made get circulated to all of your stakeholders? You decided that it was X solution. Did that make it to all of the stakeholders? Do they understand? Are they invested? And so what I do is I actually track work going through the product development lifecycle. And I tend to monitor for, has it passed? I'm going to use the word stage gates. Don't throw something at my head. People hate that word. But I do use small stage gates at the end of these to find out, has the decisions you've been making and has the work that's moving through the system made it to the stakeholders in the right way? Have you shown the outcome you intended to produce at that point in time? And so I check in. We've got quick checks that happen at the end of our discover, our define, and our refine stages, which is the front end of our PDLC. And we're constantly looking in to figure out, has information been circulated? Is there a common understanding? And have we got clarity on decisions that were made? If those three things have been checked, then we're seeing good process adherence, number one. And number two, we also know we're making better decisions as we move the stage. So I'm choosing right now to be qualitative in the way I'm monitoring, well, until we get to development. And then once we're building the thing, then we just track work moving through the system and the quality of that work moving through the system. But I'm looking at the qualitative measures at the moment, because what I'm finding is that the quantitative aren't telling me enough. The quantitative is just tells me, did it go through the stage gate? It didn't tell me the receipt on the other end. It didn't tell me the quality of what we're looking at. It didn't tell me if we have the right hypothesis at the end of the day. So we're starting to look at qualitative measures.
You said something right at the end there, which was kind of the quality of the output. How do you measure that quality of the output? And I think you kind of just said, you're working on that now. But in product ops, and frequently from product ops perspective, it has always been this difficult conversation about how do you measure what we do. Quantitatively, we can, exactly as you said, we can monitor that people are adhering to the process. But actually, the quality of the output there, so actually, did the communication of the release note land well? Did the discussion with stakeholders on the updated roadmap, did that land well? What's your thoughts on this? What's your thinking here?
So we are doing a couple things right now, and I don't know if they will scale. So just putting that out there. We haven't tested these for scale yet. But so for instance, we'll do a prototype review. And I've done this in my last few companies. And at the end of the prototype review, everybody, stakeholder, PM, designer, whoever's on the call, give me a fist of 5. What is the quality you believe? Did we hit the mark? Do we have work to do? And it's something as simple as that will tell me we're moving in the right direction or we're not moving in the right direction. It's a signal, right? If I'm seeing more ones than I'm seeing fives, back to the drawing board, we've got work to do, which you normally know by the end of the conversation anyway, right? So I'm getting that piece. From a release notes perspective, because we're also working on release notes and change logs, I will go and I will talk to a roundtable of CS and support. And I will say, what did these tell you? And then if what they told them, if their takeaways from reading them were the same as the intended takeaways as the PM, we've hit an output quality, right? And so right now this is being done conversationally, Graham. That's why I'm saying this doesn't scale. I've got to figure out the scaling piece. But you talk to the people who received it. If you want to know if the output was the quality you expected, you talk to the people who received it, not the people who built it. Love all of us who built it, but we're not the people who have to then do something with it, right? So if we've got a prototype or a wireframe or an architectural design that comes into engineering, does this meet your expectations, right? And it's a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And we're doing a lot of those small measures in conversations, and I'm pushing them out to the teams, right? So I'm having all of the teams that I work with across a few companies really test these out, like get that immediate feedback, because it's a gut check, right? At the hip level, it's a real quick gut check on, are we meeting the mark? And if not, you can pivot immediately. But if you are meeting the mark, keep going and keep moving down that pathway, keep doing more of what you're doing for that team. Because the other piece of this that we're not talking about is there's a normalization by team, right? And so we can do whatever we want to set these giant processes in place and say, here are your stage gates, this is the output, this is what the artifact looks like, here's all the things that you have to do, check the list. And yet every team is still going to need something a little bit different. And so I think within each team that's moving through the process, there's also some normalization within that team around, does it hit the mark from a quality perspective?
Yeah, I think the way I've thought about this, and I've worked with a lot of internal teams or, teams creating internal products, etc., etc. I've been an internal PM myself, and it comes back to customer feedback, right? Like how, like I used to get this question so often. It's like, oh, but how do you measure, that your internal product hits the mark? And it's like, well, how do you measure any product hits the mark? Like talk to your customers, talk to your users, talk to the people, like you say, at the receiving end of the information. And you can do this so casually as well, right? If you are presenting the roadmap or the, quarterly outcomes you're shooting for. And 3 months ago, sales was absolutely flabbergasted because they didn't know what to get. They didn't know when to expect it. They didn't know what it meant for them. And now you're sitting there and feedback is positive or nobody is up in arms. Like that, as qualitative as it may be, that is a fantastic measure.
It is. It truly is. You just have to get people to buy in to being qualitative. We're stuck in this very like data first mindset, and I get it. I'm all about being data informed in your decision making. Qualitative's got a place too. I just want us to create a moment.
Any good kind of feedback process in terms of getting that quality feedback, is any of it truly scalable? I'm looking at Microsoft Office tools and Google and all of this sort of stuff. I mean, if you take out, app reviews, which generally are not worth the paper they're written on, and 5-star reviews and things like that, if you're looking at that truly qualitative information, is it actually that scalable? Or is it just you need to go and talk to people and you need to potentially then throw more people at a grander scale? You need to throw more people at gathering and interviewing and getting that feedback back.
There's also AI tools for that, right? You can turn qual into quant if you have enough qual by creating buckets and categorizing them. So I think there's always a give and take. I think for product ops, what I find to just be super relevant is that, yes, you can absolutely measure hard data, right? You can measure how many interviews happened this month. That is a number. That will not tell you how valuable they were, how much information was extracted, or necessarily whether the right people even showed up, right? And I do think it's always about that. It's about having both. And that is really the only way you can draw a line to, are we going up or down? Are we getting better? Are we staying the same? Are we getting worse? And I think both have their place. It's a great storytelling device to say, look at how many experiments we ran this month. That's really something people can rally behind. But at the same time, you also, as a product ops professional, need to be mature enough to be able to say, okay, 90% of them failed, and that's not a bad thing, right? You need to be able to put those numbers into context.
Yeah, the no's as valuable as the yes. Right.
Yeah. We had exactly this come up just yesterday. And it's in fact, This morning in a conversation, I actually had exactly the same pieces saying, hey, look, the fact that we ran 10 experiments, we shouldn't be looking at them as that they failed. Actually, what can we take from that? And there's learnings to take from that. There isn't such a thing as a failed experiment. It's an experiment that might not have come out the way that we thought it was going to do, but it still told us something. We've learned something from that.
100%. As somebody who used to work in a company that ruthlessly had multivariate tests for every single thing, we were very, very happy when we got to not build something.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of overhead.
Folks, my last question to you in the last few moments, what does the rest of the year look like for you in terms of your plans for product ops?
Lovely. So we are, transparently, at my current company, we are reworking our product development lifecycle because the things that got us to where we are today do not get us to our next stage of growth. So the rest of my year at my primary role looks like reworking the PDLC, which I think is fun. It's always an enjoyable process to partner with the team on and to figure out how do we get to a place that's just more scalable, more workable, reduces their cognitive load at the end of the day. So that's a lot of what my personal year looks like. But I think for product ops as like an industry and as a function and a profession, I think the rest of the year is about figuring out how does AI reduce that cognitive load. I know we're all tired about talking about AI. It's in every product ops conversation we have. We cannot avoid it. But at the end of the day, we are the function that allows other product functions to scale and be successful. Right? And so it is our fundamental charter to figure out how does this new set of tooling, functionality, skills, how do they make us more successful? How do they make our teams more successful? And so I think the rest of this year looks at us figuring out what is the AI tech stack and product for our teams. Is it that? What do we get back? How do we measure if that is going to have an impact or not? And then ultimately, how do we use that to scale product thinking? Because coming back to the start of our conversation, the whole point of what we are here to do at this point is to create time for quality thinking and decision making by humans. So I think the rest of our year is figuring that out.
Wow. That's firstly super way to end and super exciting for contest. I'm doing exactly the same this year in terms of figuring out what we do with AI tools and things like that. But absolute pleasure to hear all of that, and I would genuinely love to kind of have you back on the show in 6 months' time, maybe towards the end of the year, and let's have an update. Let's look at what your findings that we talked about here, particularly in terms of what you're using AI for, how has that reduced cognitive load for your teams. I think that'd be absolutely fantastic.
I would be delighted. I can't say enough about how much I like nerding out on this topic.
Fantastic. Antonio, any last thoughts from yourself?
Goodness, no, I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I love that as a product ops discipline, we're all, kind of going in the same direction, and it really feels like we all have the same mission. And it's so important to repeat that mission over and over and over again, because we have absolutely made strides, but I think it's really important to remember why we're doing this, right? It's not process for process sake and all of these things. It's really giving people back time to think so that they can build better products. That's at the core of everything we do.
Absolutely. Perfect way to end this episode. That's it for today for all of our watchers and listeners. I would absolutely wholeheartedly thank our special guest today, Neale-May, for everything that you have shared today of mic drop moments and snippets and whatnot that are just fantastic takeaways. So I do hope everybody else has enjoyed that as well. Please do connect if you're not already with any of us on LinkedIn. We always love to have product ops conversations. I know Fo does as well. I talk to her enough. Thank you to everybody watching today, and Antonia and I will be back and look forward to welcoming you on the next episode of the Product Opscast. Thank you, everybody.